Hi, it's Luca from the Polyglot Dream, and I'm here with Timothy Donor. For those who don't know, Timothy Donor is a polyglot. He's a teenager super polyglot, and a lot of people in the community, language learning community, know him. Hi, Tim. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Luca. How are you?
I'm doing great. The weather here in Versailles is absolutely fantastic, so I'm in a great mood, and I hope that the weather is great in New York as well.
Perfect.
Okay, now I have a few questions for you, Tim. The first one is going to be on about your interest in languages. So the very first question is, how can you speak so many languages at your age? What's the story behind? It's a long. I know it's a complicated question. It's a little bit vague, but try to make it short. But
Yeah, sure. Okay. I guess again, it all comes down to practice and exposure. You know, the same way you meet people like yourself or like Richard who can speak or can switch through 10 languages seemingly without effort, just because you've been exposed to them so much and you've had to practice them so much. For me, it's very much the same case. I mean, I haven't spent that much time abroad with foreign languages, but I really think it just comes down to whatever is flowing in and out of my head on a daily basis. And at this point, I mean, for example, I do get to speak maybe between 8 to sometimes 10 or more languages a day.
Mhm.
And I guess because of that, they all have a very distinct, I guess, personality, so to speak, or distinct story to them that keeps them separate from the other ones.
Okay. I know this stone has been turned over so many times. How many languages do you speak at the moment? You know, we had a discussion about speaking, the term speaking, but a language you feel comfortable with when you have a conversation with a native speaker in general.
Right. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that I speak English.
Okay. Very wise
That one
answer.
is a definite. I would put that one down as a language I speak. I mean, besides that, to be honest, I mean, I've studied more than 20 languages at this point, and I'm comfortable in most of them. But I mean, I certainly can have a conversation in each, but I mean, the question is, what good a level of a conversation. So for that, I would say, maybe I have 5 or 6 main ones that I'm very, very comfortable in, another 10 that I'm comfortable in to various levels, and I can have a relatively good conversation. And then, another 5 or 6 that I'm still a true beginner at. I'm really kind of working at to that degree.
Okay. So, what made you learn these languages, especially the less common ones?
Well, I think I've always had a big interest in history and political science. So I think each language exposes a different layer of history that you really weren't familiar with before and that you wouldn't know in any other event. What I think is particularly interesting is that you look at places very far removed from the Indo-European world, and by that I mean especially the Islamic world, and you see that all these languages have kind of interacted with each other. You find, I mean, Arabic has had an influence on everything from Wolof in West Africa to, Indonesian all the way in Southeast Asia. And you find the influence of Persian everywhere. You find kind of a cultural hybrid with each language. And that in particular really interests me. And then besides that, for other kind of less common languages, a lot of times it just comes down to, I love picking up new ones or just learning different ways of conceptualizing the world. So, for example, when I started learning Ojibwe, I found it in a linguistics textbook, and it just seemed something that was so bizarre and removed from anything I had learned before. So I decided to pick it up, or to try and pick it up. And that kind of replicates itself very often. There's no real motivation in terms of having to communicate with people. It's something that really stands out to me.
Very interesting. Okay, let's talk about the first one. So the first topic was your interest in foreign languages in general. So now let's move on to the method, your methodology to learn languages, to acquire languages. You're, as I told you numerous times, you're an encouragement for so many people learning foreign languages. Can you please tell us a little bit about your study habits? Where do you start from? What do you do? What is the very first thing that you do? And do you have a fixed routine or study plan that you usually follow, or how does it work? Very interesting. And the very first thing that you do, whether it depends on the language, maybe it changes depending on the language. Can you please tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So the first thing, in general, it depends if when I started picking up German, whatever it was, a month ago or 6 weeks ago, I decided I really wanted to learn it as a language I would be using and communicating with a lot. So the very first thing I did was I bought a German textbook with a CD very traditional way of doing things, actually, I guess. And I did the first 6 lessons. I mean, after that, I found that I did find that even if it was a very basic vocabulary, I had enough flowing in my mind to start making sentences and trying to translate everything I could on like a second-to-second basis. So not only, for example, would I have those lessons like, you know, buying things or counting through 10 or whatever it was, but I would try to use that and employ it just in everyday usage. So what happened after that was that once you have a basic vocabulary of, let's say, 100 words or 200 words, and some understanding of the tense system, if there is one, and basic grammatical constructions, which you can do then, is that you need to expose yourself to the language because you're not in a foreign environment. So the only way of doing it is trying to communicate in it, at least to yourself, as often as possible. Yeah. So what happens to me after that is that anytime I don't know a word, it's part of the learning process. You look it up, and I find, at least that from context, it's much, much easier to remember later on. Because I think, oh, you know, how do I know the word for, let's say, controversial in German, which is umstritten? And I remember that because I was reading an article on the classification of Japanese in Wikipedia. And it was umstritten that it was part of the Altaic family. Okay. I mean, stupid little things like that, and it makes the word stay in your head.
Okay.
And
okay.
I'm just
go on.
And listening to a lot.
Okay, so you just look for a base in the language, you get the basics in the language, and you're looking forward to being able to use that, you know, a few words. Do you talk to yourself? Like at the beginning, you talk to yourself in the shower, for example, as I do sometimes. You know?
Not even in the shower, just in everyday life, which is very embarrassing, actually.
So okay, wait a second. This is pretty interesting because I heard another polyglot say that he was on the bus and he was trying to talk to himself or repeat things when he was reading a book. And people looked at him a little bit quizzically, and they were asking themselves, what is he doing? But, you know, so it did happen to you, did occur to you that you talked to yourself, you know, in front of other people because you were trying to concentrate. You were trying to, you know, just train your oral abilities, not only in the shower, as I said.
I've had that happen to me during tests, even. It's pretty embarrassing because at this point, I don't even realize it. It's been just a physical habit of mine for the last 3 years.
Trust me, I completely understand. So
the thing too is that a lot of my language learning also comes from song lyrics. Especially when I started learning Hebrew, which is the first foreign language that I really did, I just memorized hundreds and hundreds of different songs, and they would be playing in my head on nonstop. And I used to kind of sing to myself in the middle of the day, just in class or in on the subway. And it definitely kind of immersed the language in my mind, even if I embarrassed myself.
So okay, so you think that some people might find it weird? I don't, you know, at the beginning I tried to do it when I take a shower, for example. It might be it's a little bit weird, but I try to focus a little bit when in these moments where I take a shower. I go jogging sometimes, you know, and I think it sticks to your head because so you think that the fact that you're actually getting something out there with your mouth helps you remember that, right? So, for example, you learn 100 words, and then do you try to form phrases with those words, with verbs? You know, you got 100 nouns or 100, I don't know, things, and then you have a list of basic verbs. What do you do with verbs? Do you look for the most basic verbs, the most common verbs, and then you try to use them?
Actually, you know, I used to do that. I had a list of 10 verbs, things like to see, to eat, to go, etc., which I still do. But at this point, actually, what I find is that once I have a basic enough vocabulary, what I'll actually do is I'll take a look at an article in the language. I'll take a look at a basic book in the language. And then by that kind of exposure, that's how my verb vocabulary comes up. So as I mentioned, for example, I read Wikipedia in German a lot. I try to read an article every day just to kind of keep it up and to build up my vocabulary. And it's really from that I've built up like the verbs that I know. So I know obviously at this point all the basic ones, but also more complicated or more esoteric ones, which I won't necessarily use, but that's kind of that's the language that I pick up. It's the more kind of academic or scientific version as opposed to the more touristy set of words, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, without a doubt. Now, okay, we talked about your method more or less, so, you know, about activating the language and stuff. What about the materials, for example? What resources do you use or prefer using? Which materials would be perfect, for you, like books with many dialogues, few grammar explanations, audio files, etc. Because I got my own preferences, like ASML and stuff. So I
Right.
was wondering about yours.
ASO, by the way, is fantastic. I have no idea why I didn't know about it before going to Paris.
Because it's
I
it's
mean,
pretty
actually,
it's pretty popular in Europe, but not as popular in the United States or other parts of the
you know
world.
what it is.
I
I
don't know
mean,
why.
because I'm mostly French mostly, but yeah. I mean, I've been using ASML to do Yiddish recently, which actually has been quite a lot of fun. Besides that, I would say a lot of times for speaking practice or just getting a very very basic level would be Pimsleur.
Hmm.
Full conversation. I know a lot of people have problems with it, but I actually like it, and it's a good way to pass the time in the mornings.
Okay.
Besides that, I what I generally tend to do is I buy some sort of workbook, and I mean I know this is just me, and a lot of people don't like this. I almost make it harder for myself by making sure I study the grammar and I break everything down in that way, because what interests me is communication as a second point, but what really interests me is the structure of it. I mean, the actual kind of linguistic typology that relates to that language. So for that reason, I like to do exercises and I love having dialogues, but it's always very interesting to break those down and see how they work and then see what other, pieces of language you can make out of that.
Mm.
Besides that, there's a lot of audio files, music, but in general, it just has to be constant 24/7 exposure. So really, it's just anything that's on the internet, YouTube bloggers, newspapers, music, whatever comes to mind.
I was just wondering if you use a combination of materials, because as far as I'm concerned, as when starting a language, the very first thing that I do is use ASML, or I just use ASML to tell you the truth. So I'm pretty used to it. And then I use other resources when I get to the intermediate level and stuff. But I was wondering if a wise combination of materials could be useful. For example, if you don't like reading, or you just want to listen, as you did, Pimsleur is pretty good. Then in the afternoon you can do something else.
I like what you said about mixing things, finding the best parts of each program that work for you. And that's definitely true in my case. And Pimsleur really does not, I found that, for example, when I started doing Dutch, I started Dutch just with Pimsleur, and I'd never taken a look at the written language. And then when I finally did, I had absolutely no idea how to read it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Shock, right? It made no sense to me. I mean, so for that, I think it's interesting to have a combination of, let's say, Pimsleur, ASML, teach yourself. I mean, whatever works, really.
Yeah, and then you can add, the real stuff on the internet, and as soon as you progress in the language.
Yeah.
Okay, no, we talked about the materials, we talked about the method, and we talked about your interest in languages. Now, I was wondering, maybe in part, you already answered this question about vocabulary, how you apply vocabulary. So the first question would be, I heard you saying that you usually learn a huge amount of vocabulary in a very short time. So I was wondering, what is your technique for doing it? You learn them mainly from context, as you said, or also making your own lists from words. Do you like lists?
I love lists.
Okay, so tell me how you go about it.
Well, I think in general, I tend to use a copious amount of flashcards. I mean, it's a very rudimentary thing, but it is quite effective. And I mean, anytime I have free time, just in general, I have a lot of flashcard apps on my phone. And I'll just scroll through them, and and a lot of these apps, they quiz you on them, or they quiz you in reading, writing, and speaking. So I think it's really just from that very, very repetitive but useful process that you begin picking up vocabulary. And at least for me, I find that especially in those sorts of contexts, I tend not to forget them. Again, it really helps building vocabulary if you listen to music a lot and you memorize song lyrics, or if there's a certain book that you're really interested in and you're reading with a dictionary or something like that. That will help you inordinately. But I think in addition to that, you can also take the traditional approach, and I like to combine them.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And what about grammar? What is your opinion on studying grammar? Do you think it is important to deliberately consider grammar rules right from the beginning, or is it a hindrance at the beginning, or do you find it helpful? There's, as you know, I wrote an article about that, and there's a lot of people who think that grammar, you don't have to use grammar books if you want to learn a language. You infer grammar rules from the language for constant exposure. So what's your take on it? I think you do it differently. We had a discussion when you were in Paris. You said that you like grammar, you like deciphering grammar in general, as it were, a code. What do you do?
To be quite honest, I have to say, for someone just learning a language for tourist purposes or just, communication, you don't really have to learn grammar. I mean, quite honestly, I think in some ways, as I said before, I make it almost hard for myself by studying extra, but it is what interests me. And I think, definitely if you have a language class, let's say you're trying to teach someone Hindi, for example, is the first thing you're going to do to, explain what split ergativity is? No, probably not. You're going to have people staring with their jaws open who are going to run out of that class as soon as they get the opportunity. I think, in general for me, studying grammar it's an interest because I see all language fundamentally just more or less as a code that can be broken down. And once you have those individual puzzle pieces, you kind of have the key to saying anything else. Obviously, if you're living in a foreign environment, it's very, very different. Or if you have a thing like Pimsleur, it's very different because that's just constant exposure. So well, I don't know this is the ablative case, but I know that this is the way the word sounds when I put it in front of this preposition. And that's the way that all humans develop language. For me, however, because I'm kind of, I'm doing this from the sort of solitary confinement of books, it's a way of keeping the language interesting for me and kind of keeping it fresh in my mind. But in addition to that, there are a lot of benefits about, learning the grammar beforehand. Obviously, people will understand you no matter how badly you butcher the grammar, as long as you kind of have a good sense of what you're saying. But I think, in general, it definitely does have its benefits. At least for me, when I'm speaking a language, I'm constantly flipping through that grammar.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, as far as speaking is concerned, people are amazed by the fact that you start speaking a new language in a matter of weeks. What do you do actually to acquire speaking fluency in such a short time? Any special training techniques like shadowing audio materials, talking to native speakers from day one, or what do you do exactly?
Well, those. Yeah, I mean, I think living in New York, I've definitely had the opportunity to kind of practice a lot of languages that you wouldn't necessarily get to practice in a lot of other places. So on any given weekend, I can go out and I can speak Chinese or Bengali or Hindi or Wolof even. I mean, that's certainly very, very helpful for me. And a lot of times these people are very receptive to having foreigners speak their language. So that's definitely been a plus in terms of practicing. And also I would say just going through an internal monologue and talking to myself 24/7 certainly keeps the language fresh in my mind, and it almost gives me a cheat sheet when I'm speaking. I've been through so many fake conversations in my mind that by the point I start talking to someone, there are really only so many things that they're going to say to me. And at that point, I really just feel like I can pull out phrases that have already been in my head for weeks and make a conversation out of that. And then, in addition to that, I think a lot of it is it's just about confidence. I think even if you're not very good at a language, if you're talking to a native speaker and you have a relatively good pace of speech and you throw in vocabulary words that aren't so common, they're going to be a lot more relaxed around you, and that might make it a more interesting language experience. So it's the combination of all those things.
I think it's a very interesting answer you just gave. So you think confidence is pretty important, I find it as well, because I think confidence is one of the most important things in language learning. I know people who actually know the language, but they don't have confidence in themselves, and thus the result is much poorer than their actual possibilities. So basically what you're saying is that you train yourself all the time because you're constantly thinking in the language, and then you are confident, right?
Absolutely.
That's a great answer. I like it. Simple and to the point. Let's talk about accent. I like accent and pronunciation, intonation, and stuff. You have received many positive comments about your accent in some of the languages that you speak on YouTube. Do you devote any special attention to it, or have a particular technique for getting it closer to native speakers, or what do you do? Do you care about accents? I know we already discussed it in another interview, but I just wanted to know a little bit more in detail. What do you think about this story, accents and stuff?
So as for accents, I would say, in general, I don't pay as much attention to it because I'm more interested in language from a linguistic perspective, but of course it is important. And, there have been a lot of times where I've butchered it, especially in Russian and a number of other languages. And again, I think that just comes with constant exposure. I would say, probably I'm most comfortable speaking in French because I've actually spent time in France and I have to speak it on a daily basis. But for languages with less practice, then accent is certainly a problem. But I would say, in general, growing up in New York especially, again, you get so much exposure to people speaking English with different accents that it's very, very common to hear English spoken as a second language. Perhaps it's more common to hear it as a second language than it is to hear it as a first language.
Mm-hmm.
So for that reason, I think we're exposed from a very young age to all kinds of intonations and pitches, and that inadvertently kind of influences the way that we speak, or we kind of impersonate other people. And when I was younger, actually, I used to do radio commercials, so I used to at least have an ear for accents. At this point, not so much anymore. But I think, again, I mean, if you really want to do it, all it takes is a lot of dedication and practice and listening.
Okay. So we just touched on very general topics. I want to, end the interview here, but I just wanted to tell you that, this one was in English for those who are wondering, because Timothy and I speak a certain number of languages, but I just wanted to propose, if you want, you can ask in the box below, YouTube box. If you can ask some questions, and we will answer a selection of the most interesting ones. We will discuss them in that and in other languages to make the conversation even more interesting. So the next video is going to be, we will be answering and discussing some of your questions. So thank you, Tim, for being here for the interview, and I'm going to talk to you very soon.
Great to talk to you, Luca.
Bye.
Bye.